Today we're blessed to have Ted Jauw back to speak to us today, and he has a very interesting message on faith and science.
I just want to start by saying Happy New Year to everybody. And as a pagan, I have many, many different New Years. So Christmas is New Year, and Advent is New Year, and Halloween is New Year, and mainly because I'm so ADHD that I keep starting over again, and I never actually finish a year. But I am so glad to finish last year. I don't know about the rest of you. And so I'm also very happy to talk about faith. Mike, your spiritual leader, if you don't know who Mike is, has put together this year a list of themes, and we usually do that here, except this year we're using Charles Fillmore's Unity list of words, themes, and powers. And this month's power is faith. I want you to think of the whole year, though, not as I got information about faith today, I got information about strength this month, and I got information about love this month, is to take themes in a much broader fashion as if it was all meant to be together, and to think of your sermons, your Sundays, as a long process that goes throughout the year that gathers more and more and more things that are meant to be together and to put together. And I'd like to focus for myself, because I like to give myself challenges, to understand the powers as superpowers. Okay, so I love words. Super means above and beyond. And so, like Superman, and I want you to think of each word as we go through it, through the month, as beyond what you think it means. And that's really important to me, because I think that you might have people who come and tell you or talk to you or use these words or say these words in a way that is sympathetic to you. In other words, my idea of faith and your idea of faith meets somewhere in a common ground, but that common ground is based upon hundreds and sometimes thousands of years of collective evolution or de-evolution. So faith. Faith comes from a Latin word that means feid. Feid is like fide. It's like fidelity, right? Everybody knows what fidelity means, right? But fidelity means you're true to something. We think of faith, and if you were raised in any Christian denomination or religion, you probably grew up hearing the phrase that was actually from the Catholic phrase. It was a papal edict that changed the definition of faith from fealty, okay, we know what that is, fealty, from fidelity, from loyalty, to belief, and changed the name of belief to faith, so that belief did not mean to belove somebody or to be fidelitous, that's a word, fidelitous to somebody, but to be unquestioning and to have faith meant to not question. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on a Facebook, if you ever read me on Facebook, you'll know that I'm I'm not as calm as I appear to be in front of you right now, and that I have tendencies to go on long screeds, which are longer than the screeds that I go on here. But I mentioned there that I'm a paleontologist by degree, and my minor is in archaeology, and so I'm a scientist. And they said, well, how can you be a scientist and believe in all of this woo-woo stuff that you believe in? And this was asked to me by an atheist, by the way. And my answer, which was very, very, very long, really came down to this. I am a faithist. Let me explain what that means. I do not see faith and science as opposites, because they're simply not. In fact, I started as an atheist. And you know who converted me from atheism? Carl Sagan. When I was in college, downtown here, at the what we at that time called the University at the corner of Lyon Avenue, or UCLA, or Grand Rapids Junior College at the time, we had what was called the Great American Talk Festival, and all these amazing people every year, 5, 6, 7 people came and talked. But they didn't just talk, they stayed for a whole week, and they met with students, and they taught classes, and they met with the community, and they gave little tiny lectures. They went to the churches. And so as a student leader, I had the privilege twice to be with one of those great people and just drive them around. I got to tell you that when I was in college, I didn't have a driver's license, so it was totally illegal. The first person I get to drive around, and I talked about him when the first time I ever talked here, was Robin Williams. I spent a week with Robin Williams, so it was life-changing. But even more life-changing was the week that I spent with Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan, who is embraced universally as probably the person who has the ability to describe, share, communicate science to all people at all levels, no matter how smart or not smart you are. And so, as an atheist and as a budding scientist at the time, I got to spend an entire week with him, and we talked a lot. I asked him, how he squared his atheism with the idea of being a scientist. And that's kind of a weird question, but because most of us think as skepticism and science as being the same as atheism. But he explained to me that it's not. That really a true scientist is a skeptic. Not in the philosophical Platonic sense, like the Greek sense, but in the sense that they don't believe a thing and they don't not believe a thing. They are not against theism. They are not agnostic either. They are not Gnostic. They are neutral. But he also explained to me at the same time that the ideas of faith and belief were based more on feelings of fidelity and love and experience, than they were on what we think of as blind faith. I think that over time, the word has evolved in order for us to not question. And I think that if we go to the beginning of the word, whether it is in the actual Gnostic sense, where the word agnostic comes from, the sense of people who knew God simply by having a direct relationship with God, to the sense that religion made us experience faith vicariously. You believed because I said so, because I wear a robe and I am the vicar. I have a vicarious relationship to God. I am God on earth. Whatever I say goes. That's not faith. Faith is fidelity. Faith is belief, to belove something. I went from being an atheist to becoming a scientist, and from becoming a scientist to becoming a questioner, and from becoming a questioner to somebody who met so many people in the world whose worldviews changed my own, that I realized and I understood that the spectrum from faith to science is not a spectrum at all. That both are perspective, that both are neutral, that both require us to bring ourselves to things that we are informational at all time. Now, when I go to unity churches, when I go to Unitarian churches, when I go to Universalist churches, when I go to UU churches, anything that starts with a U, I generally will find that there is an aspect and a general population within the population that considers themselves atheists and Christian. And I think that the ability for those two to live in harmony together is not because they're harmonious, but because really they're one. That what they do and what they share and who they are when they are together has nothing to do with belief, has nothing to do with facts, has nothing to do with information. It has to do with faith. It has to do with fidelity to a mission. I am a priest of the Yoruba faith. We are monotheistic. We believe that there's one God, but the difference is he's not a white-haired old man. In fact, he's not even a white man, that looks down on us. And that's a problematic image that has evolved over time, when really in the old Christian church and in the pagan churches that preceded it, the Roman church, the pagan church, the Paganist church, and the Greek church before that, those empires did not perceive God the same way that we do now. I think that it is pervasive in our culture once that we've become Abrahamic faiths, to become monotheistic, to become focused on a linear concept that makes God a vertical construct. God is up here, and then come the popes and the bishops and the priests and the preachers, and then the divine right of kings who are priests and preachers who all speak for God, because we can't possibly know God. So God puts all of these other people up above them. And surprisingly enough, whether you are Judaic or Islamic or Christian, they're usually guys. And that's problematic. It's problematic in politics, and it's problematic in faith. Let me explain that to you. If faith is a superpower, right? If faith is a superpower, then it can't abdicate your free will. It cannot abdicate your questioning mind. You cannot give up your mind. And what does that mean? Well, the 12 powers, the 12 months, the 12 colors, the 12 apostles of Charles Fillmore's Unity 12 Powers have 12 different colors each month, and they have 12 different ideas each month. And they have 12 different apostles each month. But they really don't. If you look at the list carefully, there's only 11. Somebody's not there. Somebody's missing. Somebody's out selling out Jesus and was not allowed back because his superpower is not one we're talking about. So the superpower of betrayal, all right? So what is there? Well, you'll notice that in January and in October, there is Peter, and there's this guy named Simon the Zealot, Simon Zelotes. That's the same guy. Simon the Zealot changed his name to Peter, all right? So actually Jesus changed his name because he had a PR problem. You see, Simon was such a zealot, literally. He belonged to a radical terrorist cult that believed in the violent overthrow of Rome. And so when Jesus was confronted in the garden, he cut the ear off of a Roman soldier because he carried a sword with him at all times and saw himself as the protector of his teacher, the rabbi, and as a radical terrorist. That's where we get the word zealot from. Well, Simon had a problem after that, probably because there were wanted posters up everywhere. And Jesus changed his name from the zealot to Petrus, to Peter, the rock. He went from the zealot, the impulsive, to the rock. If you go into the 12 powers, you will see that each of the 12 powers has a perception place on the body. Charles Fillmore was a student of Hindu philosophy at the time. We've talked about this idea that at the time that the Fillmores were fomenting what became a movement, they went to the World Congress of Religions, and they met Yogananda there. And through him and through many of the Eastern philosophies, they began to see that the mind was not the only place to perceive, and that your ability to believe in a thing was based upon all of your senses and all of what we call the chakra, or what the Mayan call the chokla, or what the Yoruba call the oti oju, the eyes of the body. Now the Fillmores, because of their belief in Christian Science at the time, they saw the mind as the primary thing, and that's a very, very Western thing to believe. Not all of the world believed that. And by not all of the world, I mean like if there's 7 billion people in this room, only about 1 billion see the mind as the primary perception point. Why? Because of the eyes. You've got to see it to believe it. And in order to believe it, you have to give up your free will. But you don't. Because your eyes are not the only things that see. So let's get back to Peter, Simon, or Simon, also called Peter. Simon and Peter are related to the brain. And so while all of the different eyes of the body, or 12 points or perceptions of our superpowers, are in different parts of our bodies, The two that are Simon and Peter are in the brain, and if I were the visual aid here, one is the center of the brain, and that's somewhere, and the other, and this is from the 1800s, right, like 1870s, and the other is over here. We knew that the lizard brain, the brain that we had that was primitive, was full of zeal. This is the Simon zeal brain. And then somewhere in the middle here, and nobody really agreed until later where that was the faith brain. So faith and zeal become related in terms of where they are in the brain. Where faith resides in the brain is important. Why? Because when we think of the brain, we think of everything. And when we think of the front of the brain, we think of the primacy of humans and primates and the idea that we are more than just believers. We are scientists. We are factual. We know truth. That's two problematic words, know and truth. But if you go back 2,000 years, what we have is beliefs and Gnostics, our idea of gnosis. Not knowledge, but gnosis. And that's something different. And so now, if you were to look at how the brain is divided, because we've evolved in terms of our idea, our scientific idea of the brain, most of the unity charts that you will see now will say that the pineal gland, or the pineal gland, is the center of the brain. Right? It's really not in the center, but it's right somewhere down there. And it's really close to the lizard brain. And so your zeal and your lizard brain and your pineal brain are close together. The pineal gland is a gland. It's not a brain, it's a gland. And it produces chemicals, right? Primarily, it produces melatonin, which is derived from serotonin. And this is going to get all sciencey on you here. But our feelings, our emotions, our love, our fidelity comes from the chemicals that are produced in our body. Dopamine, serotonin, endorphin, adrenaline. I should know that one. All of those chemicals produce our feelings. Some of them produce fight or flee feelings. Some of them produce freeze feelings, fight, flee, or freeze. Some of them produce transcendent feelings, where we transcend above those things. So some of them, and many people believe this, if you put the right chemicals together, you feel love. If you put the right chemicals together, you feel God. If you put the right chemicals together, you are God. Better living through chemistry starts inside of you. And a lot of what we call pharmacy has been made to reproduce the ideas of what chemicals do inside of us. Now, that's a scientific way of looking at that. But in a real way of looking at this, in a perception way of looking at this, in a human way of looking at this, our ideas are based around really basic things: fear, happiness, empty, full, dark, light. And everything that we have from these dualistic ideas and feelings turn into other things. All right? So hunger really comes from fear. From fear I'm going to die. Fear of death is a primary feeling. Those things are controlled by your brain your gut, like I have a gut feeling, right? That produces serotonin because when I'm full, my body knows what to do. All right, so I'm a diabetic and I'm not on insulin anymore, and I'm taking a drug, and what that drug does is I inject it into me, and it tells me I'm full because it shrinks my intestines, and then it tells my pancreas to create more insulin, and then it tells my liver to stop producing sugar. All right? Literally, a tiny little drop of something changes my whole chemistry so that I no longer feel diabetic. Right? I still am. It's like being an alcoholic. You're always diabetic. But the pineal gland produces melatonin. Melatonin is the thing that we know makes us go to sleep. How does it do that? I will believe it when I see it. But what if I could see with other parts of my body? In the middle of my forehead is something that in Fillmore's time was called the third eye. But 63 million years ago, dinosaurs had a giant, it looked like an open walnut in the front of their brain called the pineal foramen, or the pineal foramen if you're English. The organ that was in the forehead and very pronounced, it actually bulged in some dinosaurs, was an eye. And it had an optic nerve, a literal optic nerve, just like the one behind each eyeball that goes to a certain parts of the brain. And this one is called the pineal foramen because it goes to the pineal gland, a gland that is not much bigger than a walnut in a T-Rex, and in a human being, the size of a grain of rice. It's called pineal because it looks like a tiny little pine cone that drips a chemical into us that tells us when it is night and when it is day, when it is winter and when it is summer, or when we are at equilibrium in fall and spring. It is in charge of the circadian rhythms, and it is also in charge of the feeling of comfort. We feel comfort when we are full. We feel comfort when we don't have any movement around us chasing us. We feel comfort when we can go to sleep. We feel comfort when we hibernate. We are a complex chemical computer, and that's the scientist in me. But the priest in me also sees that in the indigenous way of looking at faith and looking at God is that our word for God, because the Yoruba only have one, is awo. Awo means mystery. Just like the Lakota, and I lived with the Lakota in the Oglala Sioux Reservation for many years, their word is wakan. So when you hear somebody say wakantanka, wakantanka means infinite mystery. It means we just don't know. And when something is holy and sacred, we say it's wakan. When we say something is love, we say awo. When we say God, we say awo. When we say mystery, we say awo. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. I almost said another word. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there that we just don't know. The feeling I have as a priest and as a scientist is based on the idea that there are things that I think I know, because I perceive it, and all that I don't know. Socrates was once asked what he knows, and what he said was, the more I know, the more I don't know, and I will prove this mathematically, that if I take all of the things that I consider knowledge and I make it a circle, that as I increase the circle, the circumference of everything I know meets everything I don't know, and the larger that circle becomes, the more I know I don't know. Faith is not blind belief. Faith is what Buddhism calls groundlessness. I have no grounds for believing this, and yet I do it anyway. Why? Because I have fidelity and fealty to a purpose, to a reason, to a feeling. Not God, because I can't even fathom God, but I know that there are certain things that make me happy. I know that there are certain things that have outcomes that are much more predictable than others. All of us have faith. All of us get up and turn on the tap water and drink it with full faith every day that it's not going to kill us, unless we live in Flint. What does that mean? It means that our faith is earned. Who here remembers the day they met me? Okay, so when did you meet me?
When did we meet?
Or where? Yeah.
Here.
Okay. So I'm assuming it was a happy memory, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you remember a thing, your brain releases a drip into you that creates a memory. Your body is unable to distinguish the memory from the reality. It recreates chemically everything that happened at that time, mostly how you felt, and then evolved everything that happened after that. So that time I hit you with a hammer probably altered the good feeling you have from when we met. I never did hit you with a hammer. But the idea behind that is that we remember things and it gives us faith. Every time we successfully eat food and don't die, we have faith. Every time we drink water and don't die, we have faith. Every time we have a relationship and it lasts more than a month, we have faith. And when it doesn't, we don't. Cynicism, pessimism, doubt, fear, anger, hate are all the opposite sides of that. And this Wednesday, this last Wednesday, I celebrated the Feast of Epiphany. Epiphany means to shine a light onto something. It means to make it manifest by shining light on it. It means that if I shine light on you, I can see you. And if I can see you, you're real. The Feast of Epiphany is also called Theophany. Because if God, who you can't see or you can't know, becomes a baby in front of you, then surely even every Gentile king or priest will see God in the flesh. Sounds good to me. Epiphanos, Theophanos, Feast of the Three Kings, the day I got to see God. But as a pagan, I know that before we were seeing Jesus the baby, we were seeing God made flesh or corporeal in many, many different ways. Biphanos and the Feast of the Epiphany predates Christianity. And it means the same thing that we talked about last month. Sol Invictus, the coming of the light. Epiphany, the shedding of light onto things. The Latin word for the pineal gland is epiphanos cerebri, the epiphanic brain. The ability to shed light on a thing, not to make it visible, but to make me perceive and feel it. I don't have to know it's the truth. Faith does not mean I have to believe it. Faith means I have to feel that it will produce the results, the outcomes, the chemicals, the feelings that I need to act. Jesus' first coming as a baby is called the Epiphanos. In Greek, and most of the Bible was written in Greek, the second coming of Jesus was called the Epiphanos. Epiphany means we get to feel it, we get to see it. In fact, apocalypse does not mean doomsday. Apocalypse means the shining of the light onto a thing. It's epiphanic. So you say, I had an epiphany. It means I had a feeling, I had an idea, I had the light shine onto those things. You know, last Wednesday, the Feast of Epiphany was also happened to be the day that there was a joint session of Congress. I think that many of us had an epiphany on that day. But we also had on that day things that we never ever believed could possibly happen, happening literally right before our eyes. But that does not mean what you think it means. You did not see doomsday. You did not see an apocalypse. You did not see the prophetic end of democracy or the prophetic end of the world or anything like that. What you saw was simply what happened. And what you decide to do with it is the epiphany. The ability or inability to create the chemicals that create epiphany triggers the other chemicals. And when they don't get triggered, when that drip does not happen, when you do not get enough sleep, when you do not get enough light, when you do not get enough vitamin D, you have paranoia, you have depression, you have violence, you have all kinds of things that are based on a lack of fidelity to your own inner truth. Not the country, not politicians, not the vote, not the government, not your ideological party, not your social media, but to your inner truth. Faith is the production and the growing and the evolution of your inner truth, whatever that is. And whatever that is, its ability to find compassion and empathy and sympathy to all others grows it into what we call faith, what we call religion, what we call politics. If you think of Epiphany and faith as God made manifest, and you think of the idea that whenever anybody is gathered in that name, that to become enlightened, to have an epiphany, to become sacred, is what the goal is. And if it's as simple as happy or not happy, living in the light or living in the dark, doing good or doing evil, you may see it that way. But that is fully in keeping with living a life based upon science and based upon faith. Only if we change our perception, and it will not become more than just a power we have. It will not become super unless we elevate it to that level, unless we perceive it differently, unless we are willing to go and find out what it really means and what it really is to ourselves. And we're going to talk like this for the next 12 months. Ray, can you give me a little noodling on your build a mountain? If you close your eyes, I want you to meditate on the idea that your center of your brain, the pineal gland, is this tiny little thing that controls so many of our perceptions of who we are, of where we are, of what time of year it is, of how happy we are, how sad we are, how tired we are. It is literally the size of a grain of rice. But the things that it produces in us is like building a mountain. And if you can build a mountain from a little hope, from a single seed, from a grain of rice, from what is literally imperceptible amounts of chemical drip that simply come because you got some sunshine today, because you hugged somebody today, and I know many of us just miss that thing, but the chemicals that get released from that thing. If we can grow those things, and if we can grow those things and communicate those things with each other and to each other and for each other, and if we can turn that faith, that feeling, and that hope inside ourselves into our empathetic connection to all other people, then what we grow becomes the faith. Not what politicians teach us, not what priests tell us, but what we feel and grows organically, naturally, evolutionarily, by faith, by science, by our experience, by our hopes, and by our wishes, by our prayers, in a giant ball of what we call faith. And I hope you can take that into the month, but also into the next word and into the next word, because it tells a story. And for the next 12 months, Mike and Kristen and other people, Fred, we're going to take you through a journey that is a narration of your own hero's journey, of your own passion play, of your own powers and how they become superpowers. And I thank you for your attention. Namaste.